ductwork and equipment and everything else that had been in storage or had been moved 2 or 3 times over the course of years. Now that system is, because we were running longer distances, that system was based on a 5 horsepower dust collector, which pulls about 2,000 CFM. And we could have met there because a lot of the principles are still the same, but it's really inappropriate for talking about a system like that to a group of people who are arguably mostly, if not entirely, hobbyists and are probably doing this in their garage or their basement or some other smaller space. So that's kind of where this came to mind. So let me make a couple comments about what this is not going to be today. There are plenty of opportunities to grab a small dust collector. One that comes to mind immediately would be one of the Rockler ones. That's a wall mount dust collector. Put a 4-inch piece of flex hose on it, mount it on the wall right near wherever your jointer might be, and just hook it up directly, and you're done. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with a situation like that, and that may be good for most of us. I am somewhat of an inherently lazy woodworker, and I hope that would never show in the quality of the work that I do. I don't think it does, but I can be lazy about setups, and sometimes that'll cause me to procrastinate about doing a particular step. Oh, I don't want to have to take this apart and move it over here and back and forth, and there are plenty of ways that rears its head. I look for ways to minimize the effects of that potential laziness, and one of them is, if you want to do dust collection and you want to do it at as many machines as possible, then having a piped system like this is a pretty easy way to do it, because all you do is go to the machine, turn on the dust collector, and away you go. So my comments today are going to be related to that. Further to that, a lot of us have relatively small shops. Even this shop, this shop is a small shop, and the traditional 2-bag or 4-bag dust collector, which this guy is based on, and we'll talk about that in just a few minutes here, takes up a lot of floor space. And it seems to me that it's always in the way. Many of us don't have the opportunity to tuck it behind a machine where it can always stay. So having the conventional dust collector is not a great solution, in my opinion. Dismantling them or cannibalizing them and turning them into something else like this has become very popular. And you'll see people all over the internet who are doing some version of this. So this is my attempt to create a hard-piped, hard-ducted system that's wall-hung and out of the way, utilizing existing equipment that Hanna already had. By that I mean, that collector is a 1.5 horsepower Jet 1100 CFM collector. My guess is probably 5 of you have exactly that same collector in your shop right now. And many of those collectors are probably made in the same factory in China somewhere, or factories in China, and it's a reasonably good collector if it can be put into a position to kind of get out of the way. Again, this is just the focus of my conversation today. It's important to recognize that chip and shaving collection is a very different animal from fine dust collection. If you have health-related issues that are health issues that are related to fine dust in your lungs, basically in your entire respiratory system, such that you get outbreaks, you have allergies, and you're looking for a fine dust control system, you're in the wrong place. Dust collection systems will not address fine dust. It's not necessarily because that fine dust will come out of that micron-based filter. It's because dust collection systems do not generate enough suction to capture the fine dust at the source where it's generated. And that's a subject that gets to be way too complicated to go into here, but I'm going to point you in a couple of different directions. But before we go there, so the solution, if that is you, or even if you don't suffer those health issues, but you want to prevent yourself from getting there, by far the best possible way to get there is to wear a 2-cartridge NIOSH approved mask in your shop all the time. And it's certainly while you're trying to generate dust, but that fine stuff, guys, or ladies and guys, it gets in the air and it stays in the air. It'll be in the air for an hour later. We've all experienced cleaning up our shop. It looks perfectly clean. You come back the next morning and there's a fine layer of dust on everything. And you would have sworn that you couldn't see anything in the air when you left the day before. It is a problem. It is a big problem. Machine and tool manufacturers are not doing a lot to address that problem because typically the port sizes that they put on the machines are inadequate to pull enough air through them to really capture that fine stuff. That very briefly, that capturing of fine stuff, it kind of goes like this. We like to work with wood chips and wood dust at nominally 4,500 feet per minute of air movement, roughly 40 miles an hour or so. Many tools right at the tip where the superfine stuff is being generated are spewing that dust off at about 100 miles an hour. So when those little particles are being thrown at a rate like that and we're attempting to capture them with air that is moving at less than half the speed, it's an equation that doesn't work very well. There are ways to get there. Those are outside of what I am going to talk about today or what I'm even capable of talking about, because in some ways, I don't even know if those conditions actually exist. A lot of that stuff that I just talked about is available for you to read about on a site called Bill Pentz, Pentz.com. You just Google Bill Pentz and it will come up. Bill had health issues. He did a very, very deep dive with the help of a lot of other people into the whole question of dust and dust collection, specifically aimed at fine dust, and has generated a few things that we can try to do, and the rest of it is, my head still hurts from reading it. And we're talking 100-page long websites. So again, I'm going to circle back. If superfine dust is what you're after, you're not going to solve it with a dust collector. What Pentz does recommend, though, if you want to really protect yourself, 3 things. 1, wear the mask all the time. 2, if possible, take this dust collector and do not exhaust it into the room. So instead of it exhausting and coming out here, take that pipe and go outside with it and exhaust whatever gets through the cyclone separator to the outside. And 3, have a large fan that is constantly blowing air through your workspace, out a door, open another door at the other end to create cross ventilation so that superfine stuff that hangs in the air doesn't hang in your air, it goes somewhere else. Unfortunately, points 2 and 3 are difficult to do in a climate where you're paying to condition and temper the air. Sometimes it's possible, maybe in 2 seasons out of the year we can do it in Pittsburgh, but you're certainly not going to do it in the winter, and maybe you'll do it in the summer as well if you don't air condition your shop, and not that many people do. But those are some methods that one can use to get there. Okay, so bill pence. All right, now we'll get to the issue at hand. One misconception that I think a lot of people make, certainly I've made it in the past until I started doing more research, is a lack of understanding that at very low pressures, which is what we're dealing with in dust collection systems, air is essentially not compressible. So get rid of the mindset of thinking about an air compressor where you have a motor and you pump air into a closed container and then you blow it out of an air gun at 100 psi. That's because it's at 100 psi. To create suction in a dust collector, we have an impeller inside, a fan, that spins at a particular rate, and it blows air to the outfeed filter. At the same time, it's creating negative pressure on the input side of it. That negative pressure is very, very low, less than 1 psi. As a point of reference, 1 psi is equal to about 2 inches of mercury, and if you don't know what that means, it doesn't really matter, which is about equivalent to something that you have heard of before. That's 27 inches of water column, because that's often how dust collectors are referred to. That is, a particular dust collector will pull 1,000 CFM at no resistance whatsoever. But there are no systems that have no resistance. All this piping, all these filters, everything else, they all create resistance. Those resistances are often expressed in inches of water column. And that's how you go through and figure out how big of a collector you might need to handle ductwork that goes around the room like this. Typically, dust collectors drop to effectively 0 suction at about 8 to 10 inches of water column. So if, and I didn't give you this number. So 1 psi is equal to 2 inches of mercury, and that's equal to 27 inches of water column. So you can get a sense that even before you would approach 1 psi, your system would be so bogged down as to effectively not do anything. So that's just my proof, if you will, that at low pressures, air is not compressible. Now, why is that important? Well, if you're trying to move air through a duct, whether it's 1 inch in diameter, 4 inches in diameter, 6 inches in diameter, there is resistance that is created. And actually, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little off course. Let me give you an example. So if the system is designed for 4 inch or 5, in this case 5 inch duct, and you attempt to neck that down and pull that air through 1 inch hose, something like this happens to be 1 1/4 inch hose, to try to hook it up to a sander, it'll work. You'll feel air being sucked here, but it is such a small amount of air that it is not very good at capturing that fine dust. This is why big dust collection systems, if they're necked down this small, don't really work very well if you try to hook them up to your sander or your biscuit joiner or something else like that. And that's where you might very seriously want to consider using a vacuum like this one here, or to do those smaller tools. It's not an ideal situation. I'd love to be able to use a dust collector to do everything I need in the shop. And later on, I'm going to demonstrate with this collector into this sander, that it will work, but not very well. And part of why it works is because Festool has done a fabulous job with dust collection on this sander. I own, this is Hannah's, but I own that sander. I never thought I would tell you that I would spend $400 on a power, I think it's now $425, but it works fabulously. There is no dust in my shop from sanding. I don't care what grit I'm using, I don't care what I'm sanding, even if I'm sanding the edge of stuff, it sucks it up. But I'm not sucking it with this, I'm sucking it with a vacuum. And that's the big difference there, because it has a much higher suction rate and it will capture. But with a well-designed sander, as I'll show you later, you can capture a good bit of the dust from a normal operation. So I'm not telling you you can't do it, I'm telling you that you're not going to get the best possible results. All right, so air, yes?
What makes the dust collector more effective at collecting wood chips than a vacuum?
Yeah.
Because like I can read all these things and, you know, I started out in shop vac and I haven't gotten to the point of, yeah.
That's a fabulous question.
I just don't get it.
So to convey wood chips, which are much heavier than small dust, you need to move a larger volume of air. So dust collectors are all about volume, expressed as cubic feet per minute of air moved. Vacuums are more about suction. And I spoke to some people at Oneida a few days ago to try to get my head screwed on straight about some things I was a little unsure of. And they were adamant in pointing out to me that do not confuse suction with velocity, speed of the air. They're very, very different things. And I'll double back to get to that. But in general, targets are to try to start with velocity of about 4,500 feet per minute at the collector. And by the time you get to your machine, which might be 50 feet away, depending on what you are trying to convey, it's you can use less speed than that. This system is based on 5-inch ducting. I am going to demonstrate for you with that pile of chips over there at the farthest point away that we are on the hairy edge of not working. And I'll provide evidence that you'll be able to hear and you'll immediately know what I'm talking about. I knew when I was putting this together, that I was right on that edge. And the reason I was on the edge is because there's enough there's enough lack of capacity, coupled with enough resistance from length of ducting and turns and whatnot, that I was not going to be able to pull enough air through at a fast enough speed to stop the dust particles or the chips from settling out in the ductwork. So, dust collectors work with high volumes of air at relatively low suction power. Vacuums work with much less volume of air, but at a much higher suction rate. And that's why they're able to capture that small dust through small ports. Here's kind of a little drawing. I'm going to hold this here for Elmer just for a second. What I'm showing you here is a small diameter and a larger diameter duct. And kind of the hash work that I put around the perimeter is indicating that right up against the outside of ducts, that's where the air resistance is the greatest. And there's a lot of turbulence going on there. And right here in the center is where the air is freest to move. So in a vacuum system, this air in the middle, which is moving really, again, I almost used the word fast. With adequate suction, we can move more material through the center of one of these ducts. I'm going to come back to this. If I forget about it, remind me, somebody please remind me to talk about a relatively new product that Oneida has put out there. It's called, what do they call it? Supercell, hang on. Supercell. And it's basically a collector that is a combination of a dust collector and a vacuum system. It's patented, it is unique in the marketplace, and it solves a lot of the problems that we're talking about today. That's the good news. The bad news is it's $2,800 to $3,000. So it's not exactly your weekend purchase for dust collection. Does that answer your question? Kind of?
That's pretty much what I have read and seen, but I don't really get it. So I don't want to
All right,
on it, but I don't really get it.
I'll keep coming back to it. So
That's fine.
Yeah, and anybody else, please, just interrupt with questions as we go. All right, so because air is not compressible, it doesn't matter how much suction a dust collector has. If you're necking down to a 4-inch duct, you will only be able to pull about 390 CFM through that duct. It doesn't matter if it's a 2,000 CFM collector. It doesn't matter. It will only pull about 390 CFM through that 4-inch duct. Raphael?
When I replaced the furnace at home, the technician told me the same thing. Whatever I have already installed, all the ducts in the house, no matter what size blower I installed or capacity, I would not be able to move as much air based on the motor side. So the size of the piping is what limits the amount of air.
That's correct. It's a little different in a furnace system, but not much, only because in a furnace, when you move the air through the house, you are dealing with positive pressure. You're on the positive pressure side of the fan. So you can create, it's easier to create positive pressure than it is to create or to work with the negative pressure that's on the intake side of the fan. So, yes, Rich.
In my shop, I have a dust collector with a cyclone, and probably 95+% of what's captured from a machine goes through the cyclone. And that bag that's on the dust collector, after a year, there may be an inch in that bag. However, I have a ceiling mounted air filter, which captures, once again, a lot of the airborne dust, not 100%, but between the cyclone and the air filter, it probably captures 95% of everything. So in my estimation, my dust collector is nothing more than a chip collector with a cyclone, and everything else is airborne.
That's a perfect description and analogy. I will tell you what Pence will argue about your situation, and the situation that many of us do very similar to that, is that through lots of testing, they have determined that those ceiling mounted air filtration systems cannot possibly capture enough of, they can capture the fine dust, they just can't do it quickly enough, and your lungs become the filter instead of that which is caught in that airborne thing. So again, if it is a health issue, a health critical issue for you, just because you can't see it doesn't mean it isn't there.
100%, yep.
Okay, All right, so, therefore, if you have collection needs that are greater than 390 CFM, you need to be coming to the machine with ductwork large enough to handle that particular collection requirement. That's why in this shop, I used 5-inch ductwork, because that's what this cyclone separator, that's the input size right there, 5-inch. And also because in general, if you can afford it, and the difference in prices, a little bit, it's in my view, relatively negligible over time. You run the largest diameter duct possible as far in the system as you can get, and then neck down right at the machine. The reason for that is because the amount of resistance that's created inside something that's 5 inches in diameter is less, some would argue significantly less, than 4 inches, than 3 inches, and so on. So we move with 5-inch as much as possible. I'm going to jump back and forth here with various people's comments. Pence would argue, and I agree with him completely, that machine manufacturers are quite negligent in the size of ductwork that they provide for the job to be done. That's probably because we have momentum. We've got all these years of history. That said, I've got some old iron in my shop where the dust poured on it is 5 or 6 inches, because somebody back in the day knew, we've known for a long time, that it takes a certain amount of area to haul chips away. This is a Jet 12-inch joiner. It had a 4-inch dust collection poured on it. It worked, but not great. This planer is a 15-inch planer. It too had a 4-inch dust collection hood. In both cases, you will see that I cut the hood and managed to add to it a 5-inch collection port so that I could run the 5-inch duct in here and all the way into the machine, increasing the CFM collection at the machine. I can't remember the number, but I think it's high 400s. And later on, you can take a close look. It's not hard to do that. Just get a little creative with some plywood, and what you're going to want is something called a starting collar. They come in. There's basically a duct with a little flange on it that you can screw to anything and hook your hose right up to it. So that's what you see is a lot of 5-inch duct everywhere. Yes, Ken?
Bill, I have, of course, a jointer too, and I find that jointer doesn't make a lot of dust. It makes chips. And I've tried to collect off of it on a couple occasions. I quit. I just put a little box at the end of the duct there, and that's all I use. And I find out I'm very happy with it.
I did that for years, and remember I said I'm inherently a lazy woodworker? So I kind of got tired of emptying the box. It was much easier to just turn the collector on and collect it. But people, the experts in the field would argue just because you can't see the microscopic dust that's being created, especially if once your blades start to get a little dull and you're beating the edge as opposed to shearing that cut, that you're putting that small stuff up in the air.
But then you just argued I can't collect it anyway.
I agree. I'm just here to provide information.
Well, there's a solution for that, to know if you're having enough dust, or if you have too much dust in your shop, and that is to get a dust meter or particle detector. I bought one for less than $100 because I thought in my very small shop with no circulation in there, using the rasp and other things, I thought maybe there would be a lot of dust, but surprisingly with that there was very little. But I'm sure if you're using the router, that thing would go up even if you don't see it. But it gave me peace of mind just to even use it a few times. So if anybody actually wants to borrow mine, since I kind of figured out the situation, let me know. And
It's why I want
Bob
to invite you
Eckert
to my
bought,
shop.
Bob Eckert bought a different one. I think he mentioned it already, a different type of detector too. They're kind of similar. At least you get a rough ballpark of what's going on.
Well, I got your attention, Bill. How about the collapsible, the accordion style end pieces on these ducts?
Yeah, the flexible.
How does that compare with the smooth metal?
It's
Way worse.
considerably worse. I think, don't quote me on this, but I think 4 to 5x in terms of additional resistance. Let me give you a for instance. 5 feet of 5-inch diameter hard duct, 5 feet, 10 feet is 0.2, about a quarter of an inch of water column.
Okay.
So if I go 40 feet with that, I got 1 inch of water column resistance. And Ken, that question is perfectly timed, because that's the next very important thing when trying to put your own collection system together. Use hard ducting as far as you can possibly use it, and then just use flexible stuff like this for the last 4 feet, 5 feet, whatever. This, I would have, if I had more time and more budget, I would have run hard all the way into the equipment. When you come to my shop on the south side sometime, you will see that I got hard pipe all the way in. But that's because I'm me. That's because at that point when I was doing that system, my time was my own. I didn't care if I was gonna spend there literally 2 hours with adjustable elbows, twisting them and to get it all to go in there. But I also knew I was never gonna move that jointer or that planer. If you think you might need to move things, or if you need to have a relatively quick way to get there, then flexible hose like that is absolutely the right answer. I minimized that on this system again because I knew we were gonna be right on the hairy edge. Not here, we're very close to the collector here. These two machines collect like crazy. Down there, we're much closer to not collecting. And by not collecting, what I mean is the dust will settle out in the horizontal runs and plug up the system. So I'll show you that. So largest duct possible. You'll notice that where I have a 90-degree bend, like that elbow there, it's what's referred to as a long sweep elbow. Don't go to Home Depot and buy HVAC elbows and put them in, because they turn in too sharp of a radius and they create a lot of internal resistance. By long sweep, it's usually 1.5 to 2 R, or radius. So if you draw a line along the center line of that curve, that radius of that curve will be 1.5 to 2 times the diameter, the radius of the ductwork. So the larger the duct, the larger the sweep. Elbows like that, proper elbows, in this size range, 25 to 35 bucks a pop, something like that, maybe a little less. The next most important thing is these 45-degree Ys. That's always the way to come off a main line. You don't want to come off at 90. If you have to make a 90 like this one is to that, you do it in 2 steps. 45 degrees through the Y. You don't necessarily need a little straight bit in there, but I needed to get this down pipe positioned to a particular place on the wall, and then another 45. So that's one way to do it. You'll notice here, we've got a 45 and then another 45 to get us to vertical coming down. Technically, I've done some things here that in a big commercial system you would not see. Where that 45 comes off the main, the experts will tell you don't do that. have it come off in a horizontal, in other words, coming out the side, and then turn and come down, because that can create spots where you get some pressure drops and/or particles that are coming through that have settled out because of some turbulence right there, may come down and plug this pipe. Practically speaking, it has not occurred. I'm sorry, go ahead.
The chips come from that pipe, they'll just drop down.
Yes, they can. Even though we're right on the hairy edge, I have rarely found chips in here. So, because by the time they come around that bend, and they're flying fast enough that they don't settle down.
I have another question. Part of this is, wouldn't want to have some kind of fan that would make the whole air move around? Because
Inline fan? An inline fan?
no, like in the room, like make the whole room air move, because all these collectors, they collect at the spot, but whatever they don't collect, they just floats away. And if there's no air movement in the room, it just is there, and then you just keep breathing.
I think that is directly to what Pence's suggestion was. Have a fan, he wasn't talking about a circulation fan, but have a directional fan that blows air across the room. It pulls in outside air on one end and blows it out the door at this end to stop that being in the room. I can't speak to the efficacy of that, but his recommendation.
Which
Rich?
is what Dante does right down in the shop.
Well,
Opens up the garage
well-
doors and runs the big fan up in the.
Yeah, actually, when we did that, that was more for COVID than anything else. And that might, in today's understanding, maybe that's misguided, although I don't think it is, because the recognition is that COVID being airborne, you want to move, you want to turn over as much air as possible. So that's why you saw that going on. Maybe Dante does it for other reasons as well.
Well, I would say that if I had a workshop with machines running, I would run in open air, like, not in an enclosed room, but if it's open air or if there's a breeze, whatever dust straight, not just the chips, will just blow away. It's supposed to contain it over here.
Sure. And again, that's fine if you don't need to contain the air that you've spent your precious dollars to temper. You're not gonna do that in Pittsburgh in February, because
Yeah.
you're gonna heat the outside, or try to heat the
The
outside.
Dante's place, is it air conditioned?
No.
So they just open the gate, or the doors and.
Yes, I mean, that's what I do in my garage, so, yeah. Yes, Rich?
If, say the workhorse is in your shop or the planer, joiner, table saw, that's your workhorses, and the lathe is secondary, we'll say. Is because of the height of the ceiling, there wasn't a gate over at that drop there to like shut that leg off while you're using all this.
Fair question. There is a gate, it's at the end of the run.
Oh, yeah.
No, I'm not trying to be a smart aleck. If you don't allow air into, that could be 1,000 feet of duct. If air is not coming in it, there is no resistance that's being created there.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah, I would have thought.
You cannot create resistance without air movement within a duct.
Okay.
John?
Well, I'm gonna ask you what I asked you when we were here the last time. Is that pressure volume calculus enough to create enough force to keep these sealed when they're closed?
Okay.
Because that leakage creates the problem that you're talking about if these don't seal from.
Sure. So, I was gonna get there, but let's talk about that just for a second. Look at the blast case that you see around the shop. Look at the position, there's generally a little screw on there to hold them open and shut. The position of that screw is always supposed to be pushing toward the suction side, so it takes this plate and pushes it up hard against there to create a seal. Is it a perfect seal? No. But the losses from that are, I guess I'm gonna call them relatively negligible, but they're let's say relatively negligible. Now, hang on. So a little segue. So blast gates, because they're an integral part of the system. So this is that blast gate that's right there. This is an extra one that's going to be added to my system. You'll see inside here, I'll move around, I've got a bolt in there to create kind of a very hard stop on the end. Most of the time, not most, all the time, the manufacturers, they don't put a bolt in there. They just dimple this plate with a little, so there's a little nipple sticking out one end and a little depression on the other end. And I have found over time that ends up kind of sticking at both ends of the travel. So that's why I've taken the time to do that. But the bigger comment is, and this is the thing, this is part of your maintenance in a dust collection system. If you look at this gate right here, you will see that there's a line on both sides of it. That line indicates the fully closed position. The only reason that line is on there is because when I was in here the other night taking some measurements, I noticed that the system wasn't sucking as well as I had remembered when I put it all together, and I saw that gate was sitting there in about that position, which it's about an inch away from being closed. So that's what that gate looked like when it was, quote, closed. And that is a lot of air to give up, especially when you're worried about suction from that end of it. So we took this apart. Well, first of all, there's a groove in here, and you can try to get in there with a toothpick or an awl or whatever and clean it out. Having tried that several times, it's a long process because that constant ramming process jams that stuff, absolutely jams that stuff in there. So, many blast gates, this one will never be used, many blast gates are constructed like that, where both halves are welded, glued, whatever together, but there are no mechanical fasteners there. I cannot get that apart. This one has 6 screws threaded into there. These have screws with nuts on the back side. Probably doesn't matter, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. I had this blast gate apart in less than 1 minute's time. Popped it apart, we could see all the dust that was trapped inside there, cleaned it out, screwed it back together, and at that point, Hannah put some lines on there, so she starts to get a visual indicator of when dust is getting packed in there. Now, it's a long explanation to get to a disrecommendation. You will see some blast gates where this metal gate is not this long, but it is long enough that when it is, let me think about this. It's long enough that when it's closed, there's metal gate all the way out here. And when you open it, there's a hole cut in the gate to allow the air to go through. But what's going on there is the end of it is open, just like you see on this one. This casting is probably designed for those that have the gate that sticks all the way out. They're referred to as self-cleaning gates because there is no closed little groove back in here where the dust can get packed. It's a great idea in theory. I've tried a couple of them. They suck, no pun intended, at sealing. To your question, John, and in fact, this one, because it's manufactured to be used either way, I think in this shop somewhere, some of these are in use, and I could hear the air leaking out of that backside. So I caulked it and put sealant over it so that I would not create a source of leakage at that point. So, long answer to, yes, you can seal these well. You gotta pay attention to which way that screw is facing. So instead of mounting it like this, you mount it like this. And you can use, in fact, here's a little cultural question. When you were growing up, yeah, well, yeah, maybe. John and I went to college together. When in Detroit, growing up, these things, we used to call them punks. Is that a term that, who here has heard that term before for these? And where did you grow up? Is it here? So there was a Pittsburghers call them punks too.
I grew up in New Jersey, we called them punks also.
Okay, all right. So anyway, there is effectively, you know, an incense that apparently mosquitoes are allegedly don't like. I'm not sure if that was ever true. Yeah, exactly. So, but if you take 2 or 3 of these, if you take 2 or 3 of these and light them, and then turn your collector on and hold it here, you can do that. You know, this was I don't know, $7 on Amazon for a lifetime supply. Or you can buy a smoke generator for $200, which is what the HVAC guys would use, but they're not really generating smoke, they're generating something that is non-combustible. But anyway, the smoke, you can watch it, and if you get close, it will do a great job of helping you find leaks in your system. It is a really imperative thing to look for leaks, because little leaks here, little leaks there add up. Again, if you've got a really strong system, it probably doesn't make any difference. If you're on the hairy edge, it makes a big difference. To that end, I'm digressing a little bit, but it doesn't matter, we're eventually going to get there. Aluminum tape. That roll of tape is about $13 at Home Depot. It's great. It's got stick 'em on the back side. You see it everywhere on all of the joints. Even if the joints seem like it was tight, put the aluminum tape on, because it is not tight. In fact, if they made those joints so that they would fit as well as they could to be airtight, then you would be cursing the manufacturer as you're trying to put this whole system together, because you need to be able to rotate things and move things and whatever. So that is a really critical part. Where you can't get tape in, you can use caulk right down along the edge. I can't have caulked a lot of the joints, but a few of them we didn't do because we weren't quite sure if we wanted to move anything. Now that we know we don't want to move anymore, where you can't get tape in, I'm gonna run caulk, or she's gonna run caulk around the edge to get that last sealing. Yes, Bob?
You might be getting to this, but when you run your line, so you've got male-female connections, you always put the male in the direction of airflow?
I try to. Okay, I try to. It not always successful. For instance, these elbows have a male at both ends. So one of them is going to be pointed in the wrong direction. Those are the things that add to the turbulence that is inside something. While we're talking about it, you're also going to find that you're going to end up needing to cut duct at some point or another. And having a crimper, everybody can see those jaws like that, is a great thing to create your own crimping around the perimeter. This was a cheaper one, and by that I mean, I don't know, 15, 18 bucks, 20 bucks at Home Depot. And it's got 50% less jaws on it, so it works 50% as fast. I used this for a while, and then I said, I'm tired of that, and this one, who knows, you know, that probably $23 sent to China, something like that. That one probably went to China too. But really, really important to have this around. I do a lot of DIY stuff around the house, and I've used this for work around the house, venting in bathroom fans and stuff like that. So you can make ducting that otherwise wasn't going to go together with that. Money well spent. Money well spent. The joints between all of these fittings, I use self-drilling screws. Yeah, I'll leave them up here, you can look, but if you look, well, here, I'll pass one around, self-drilling screw, you'll see, here, I'll go this way, you'll see a drill bit on the end of it, as it were. Good for 1 or 2 times. My typical process would be, before I put the joint together, I would drill 3 1/8-inch diameter holes around the perimeter, and then I would simply grab that and run that in. It would go through the first hole that I drilled in the outer piece, and it would drill its own hole into the inside piece, the Mayo piece that was in the joint, to hold it together. You can just drill directly through. You can put it on there and just go, and it'll go right through. But this spiral piping is a much heavier gauge, and these screws aren't really designed for that gauge, so that's why I would typically pre-drill it. It's too late to do it in this system, and I kind of regret that, but these are very fast to help get the whole system together. The problem is you've got about 3/8 of an inch of screw sticking inside the ductwork. So it is potentially adding to the resistance that's inside, and or if you're on the hairy edge and you've got really long stringy stuff, that's a great place for stuff to get hung up on. So I was going to consider, and I will do this sometime somewhere, popping the screws out and using a rivet right through the same hole, because a rivet will leave nothing other than a very slight doming inside the duct. But unless somebody can prove to me that we're getting hang-ups inside, I probably won't go through that exercise.
And it would be hard to get the rivets out if you ever needed.
You just drill them out. Just drill them out. Because rivets are all aluminum, and they always leave a little dimple on the outside, 1/8-inch drill bit, zip, and it just comes right out. Dean?
2 questions. Where did you get the pipe, and is there any, a lot of shops have PVC. Does he have any thoughts on, because PVC I'd assume is gonna be a little cheaper, so what happens when people are using PVC for longer runs just for cost, other than the?
I have no problem with PVC, and Duncan can weigh in here in a second. The controversy of static electricity, spark, explosion, baloney. To my knowledge, there are no absolutely known fires or explosions that have ever taken place in a PVC system that was conveying wood dust. It's not to say that you can't get explosions in a dusty environment from static electricity, but nobody has seemed to be able to replicate, either in real life or in the lab, a concentration such that you can generate an explosion. That said, most people who put a PVC system up ground it, just so that they don't watch that blue spark jump from their finger, in the middle of winter when it's really dry out. And people ground it by wrapping wire around and grounding it or whatever. I think PVC is a wonderful choice because it's super smooth on the inside, but I don't know that as many of the fixtures and fittings exist in the PVC world. Some do. I mean, you can see those black PVC, that Y joint right there. That thing saved me. I bought a bunch of those from Ken, who was selling them a couple of years ago in one of our swap meet sorts of things. So I would not hesitate to use PVC if it was available for all the things that you need to do.
Where did you get all the pipe?
I collected it over 30 years, but I did need a couple pieces. I bought them from Knopf's Sheet Metal down in the Strip District. Good quality, reasonable pricing. They're a pain in the ass to deal with. They don't want to deal with you. Well, one of the brothers is okay. The other one I don't think he would care whether he sold it to you or not. So I therefore won't recommend them to you. The fittings, there's a place called I think it's called Blast Gate Company. It's in Madison Heights, Michigan. They sell fittings at a great price. So when I would go home and visit my family, I grew up there, I would stop in and pick things up. They also sell ductwork. But you want to try to find a local source for ductwork because the shipping will eat you alive. That's the problem with it. Duncan?
There's two things on the PVC. The shock issue, the static, is the biggest thing that, why you have to ground it. Because it's like, I know I've used some PVC lumber and stuff, and just all of a sudden, you're doing something and zap, okay. So that's why you ground it, so you're not startled constantly. The second thing is, with PVC plumbing, there are different sweeps and different styles of fittings. You have the bent fittings, which are the tighter radius. You have a medium, and then you have a large. You'll spend a lot more for the large, but like a 3-inch sweep on a large is like that big. It's a banana. And that's what you're gonna wanna get if you're using that as a...
Does that come in 5 and 6 and
4 usually, and then I think it jumps to 6. But at 6, you're gonna be spending some big bucks.
Yeah. And PVC has gotten very expensive of late. And you know what, that's the other reason why I knew I wanted to be in the 5-inch range. And you might think, well, why not go into 6 inches? And then, because if I can get 6-inch PVC as opposed to 5-inch PVC, and the problem there is you never want to go into duct that is too big for the capacity of your collector. I don't quite exactly understand the technical reasons for it, but the crude analogy I'll give you is it's like farting in the wind, and it doesn't work. So you want to run the largest duct possible that is mated to the capacity of your impeller in the first place. And that's why I settled on 5-inch. Frank?
Hey, Bill, I'm surprised at your experience at Knox. I've dealt with them with furnace ductwork. You can go in there with a rough sketch of what you want. They'll put it on CAD, manufacture the parts, put it together, and you've got it in 2 days. Because they're used to dealing with the HVAC industry, and these people need, as soon as they measure, they need it.
Sure.
But I've never had any trouble. They're very, very big, very
Maybe I
responsive.
just got a bad couple of times.
Yeah.
Actually, it was only once. It was really bad. The other time was just a.
Anyway, I've had good
Okay,
results,
there we
and
go.
it's cheap. You go in there with $50 worth of order, and they've got it.
Well, there's an endorsement. Raphael?
Is there a risk of static buildups in these ducts when in use?
Well, it's all metal, and it ultimately,
Are they grounded?
well, the collector is grounded through its own electrical system.
But the
So-
pipe itself?
But I'm insulated from that because that cyclone separator, which we're about to talk about, is plastic. So I'm not aware that static electricity can be built up of metal ducting. But does anybody else here have a thought on that? By conveying dust or chips? I've never received a shock from any metal duct system I've ever used.
It just needs one contact point in the whole system, and it, with a metal duct. So it's like if you're leaning against a piece of cast iron or something somewhere in here, it would be really hard to isolate out.
Well, isn't it by virtue of the fact that it is attached to the building, which is a ground?
Yeah.
So it's self-grounded.
It's metal to ground.
Yeah,
and so
yeah.
it's like even if just laying up against a piece of conduit or something, you've grounded the whole system at a level that, it's such a micro amount on static that just anything will,
Well, just
Are these holes that look like a T in the ceiling there, are they mounting?
they are. Those were put into the original concrete slabs.
Is that standard?
For a building of this age, it probably was, because this was a fact. I think when they built the building, they never knew exactly where they would need to be hanging things from. So you can see some of the piping is hung from those. I grabbed a couple of those spots. You can see this run here. you see, I use them for my wire rope suspension system. And what fits in there perfectly is a Unistrut hanging bracket, because it's a little square, it's got a couple rounded corners, it's got a 3/8 thread in the middle of it and a spring on it, and you just get it up in there. I think the corners are knocked off a little bit so you can just get it up in there. Done. John?
No,
So,
I was being Vanna White.
this, you can see the suspension. I used wire rope. This is probably 1/16 inch in diameter, maybe a little bit less. Breaking strength north of 110 or 15 pounds, something like that. So super strong. And where was that thing? Let's see the pad here. I'll pass this around. You can see on this end there's a loop and a little ferrule that's on there. The ferrule is crimped shut using a swaging tool like this. I'm sure there are other ways to get there. I had enough of them to do that this was worth the $35 purchase at Home Depot. Although,
Can you show what that looks like when you, what is?
so it is basically a big set of pliers that's got tremendous leverage, and these various round spots in here take these ferrules of varying sizes. So effectively, that guy goes in there like that, and you squeeze it, and it crimps the ferrule hard. The ferrule is made out of aluminum, crimps it hard against the wire, stops the wire from moving. So the wire manufacturer suggests that the way you hang it is you create a loop, you put the loop through something, you do that, and that's what's going on up at the ceiling, as opposed to looping this through a hook and then crimping it like that. I think the reason is that puts a lot more strain on the ferrule than if you do this. I'm not a rigger, I don't quite understand the mechanics of why some of those things are. All I know is it was easy enough to follow, because I could make all these in my shop ahead of time and then just leave them long and cut the excess off. There's a little, you can see everywhere, a little guy that looks like this. This is an item called a gripper, and it's got 2 holes in it that are one way, so the cable will go through, and if you try to pull it back, there are little barbs inside that bite onto it, but there are little releases on the side. So that's how they're hung. I use them here, I use them everywhere. You don't have to do that. Plumbers, that perforated plumber's tape that you see, lots of people use that with great success because it's full of holes. You can screw it into ceilings or whatever. I just like this because it was an elegant solution, and I like elegant solutions whenever possible. I'll leave this stuff out, you're welcome to look at it. What else about hanging stuff? Any other questions on kind of the generic ductwork discussion that we've had? Yes, Bill?
Question, I have a filter like that, and I always wonder, does that plug up on the inside?
Absolutely.
And is there anything you can do about it?
Absolutely. Let's go there. This is a kind of a free-ranging conversation. Okay, so once you put a system together, there is maintenance that needs to be done. The most important maintenance is checking for leaks or plugs. This guy should probably be cleaned in an active shop once a week. Cleaning is very easy. You'll see plenty of these filter sorts of assemblies that have a handle on it, and that handle's connected to a little paddle that runs around the inside. I eliminated that here because Oneida, and I trust them. I mean, they're in business to sell stuff, but I trust them. They contend that those paddles are not good for the inside of these this pleated filter media, that they will eventually create weak spots, thin spots, and the media that they're trying to filter and hold back will actually get through those spots. So I don't do it. They have, in their automated systems, they have pulse jets of air, or they have a valve that you throw that actually momentarily reverses the airflow that causes it to turn from pressure to suction or vice versa, and that's how they clean the filters. In the real world, where most of us live, that we don't spend $3,000 or $5,000 or $10,000 on filtration, we have a very simple system, and this is the system that I put together. Lots of people will put, have the same thing, hang a bag here, or whatever. I thought that, one, Hannah didn't have that amount of space to give away. Two, I just think it's ugly, and I really hate to waste all this space. And so, now's the time for a little sales pitch. So they sell this thing at Home Depot, and this may be some of the best $10 I've ever spent. That snaps on to a 5-gallon pail. This screws in. There is a seal here. They sell it as a, well, what was that?
I was like a paint saver.
Maybe paint saver. People who
It's a prepper bucket.
prepper to save food, your dog food, whatever. It is a great, quick way to have airtight access inside a filter. So Bill, I came in 2 weeks ago to talk to Hannah about something, and I cut something on the chop saw, and it wasn't sucking at all. I said, "What's going on?" "Oh, no, I didn't say anything to her." And then a week later, I got a text, and she said, "Something's wrong with the dust collector." And of course, I made a joke with her that, I just installed it. You don't get a lifetime service contract. But I had to ask, when was the last time you cleaned the filter? And the response, sheepish as it was
Never.
"Oh." So she took the bottom off and kind of just reached up in here, and a whole pile of dust fell out. It was only dust. This is here to collect any of that will come loose. I don't know who made the comment. Rich made the comment earlier. This thing would take a lifetime to fill up. That's how efficient that cyclone separator is. Only the superfine stuff gets through there, and that isn't even that much. But that which does get through often deposits itself on the inside of the filter media. So you can see some falling out now. It's not bad. So you can reach up in there with a brush and just brush it lightly, Bill. Or the way that I recommend is you put your mask on, and with the collector off, you turn your air gun down to about 40 psi, and you just blow air from the outside through it. Oneida and others say that's absolutely fine. You don't want to be right here against it because you can harm the filter media, but from about 3 to 4 inches away, start at the top and just blow through, and it blows the stuff off the inside of those pleats, and it just comes down in this bucket and collects it. If you really want to get anal about it, get another vacuum cleaner and go up in there and vacuum out the inside. Some people have said that they use water. They take it outside and they spray it with water on the inside and get rid of it. That seems extreme to me. Yeah. And this access here, it can be through the bottom, but also if you just take these off, you disconnect the hose at the top, take these, loosen these knobs, and just lift the whole filter off and take it outside and brush it and clean it.
I have a group Grizzly vacuums, and it doesn't have a small hole in the cut. It's just a big hole that's the same size as the filter up there.
Yes. So let me use that as a segue then into some design issues here. I don't know if you heard that, what Bill said is his filter has a large hole underneath it, probably nominally the same diameter as the filter
Essentially that
itself.
size, and
Yeah.
then there's a bag that,
Yes. Yes.
this belt
Yes.
that hangs on, and everything's supposed to fall down.
So the only reason that this is here is because it was by far the easiest way for me to mount this filter to here. Otherwise, I would have had to figure out a way to route a little groove in the top of this plywood shelf. And I knew that I wanted to use this, so this is the thing that the bag, the filter was above it and the bag was below it in the original jet collector. And inside this is a beautiful little steel ramp all the way around that comes down to this diameter. So I just got my trusty angle grinder out, cut it off, and there, and my mount was done. Let's talk just a little bit about the build. So everybody can kind of see what's going on there. That's just a regular dust collector motor impeller assembly that normally would have been tilted 90 degrees to the right and sitting on a mobile base, which is now being used as a cart right there in the shop. You can see that little cart there. And the hardest part about it is lifting it up there by yourself. Well, I felt strong that day. The heart of the system is this Dust Deputy Oneida Cyclone separator. It separates like crazy. And again, we've already talked about it, only the very fine dust gets through. It's a really interesting thing to listen to when you shut the collector off. You can hear stuff circulating in there. If you let the collector run long enough, the stuff that's in there that's circulating will eventually come all the way down. But it is relying on gravity and the slower airflow that's in there to eventually come all the way down. Critical parts about developing a system like this are you have to have absolute sealing on this side of the system. If you have a little bit of a leak here, the air will rush in here, pick up the chips, and they won't end up going, the cyclone separator will stop working correctly, and the chips that are coming in will end up finding their themselves right in here and ultimately in here. So if you ever see chips in your bag or your pail or whatever, you know that you've probably got a downstream leak. I have some little clamps to go on there, but they've proven to be completely unnecessary. All this is on the underside here is some weather stripping. This is 2 layers of particle board, and these happen to be brand new Brute dust cans, so the top edge is not all beat up. There's one here, there's one over there. The height here is so that an empty one can be stored under there, although Hannah empties her garbage often enough that she doesn't need to collect too much of this. So it's important that you don't let this get too full, so that's my door to look into
Oh,
it.
that's cool.
Yeah, in the old days, it was a much smaller thing and you couldn't really see in there, but now I can look in and see really, really well. You never open any of this stuff up when the machine is running, because otherwise, and you got all the chips where you don't want them. This is loose, and the cables here are so that when it comes time to change the barrel, you just suspend this like this, and then pull this off. So again, lazy Bill. I don't want buckles, I don't want belts, I don't want any kind of crap like that. I want to be in and out really fast, because that's how you get yourself back to work doing the stuff that's fun. So that's kind of what I designed for this end of it.
And Bill, did you know that the arrangement of that canister was sealed because of the smoke test you did, or?
I have not done the smoke test on this, so I'm just recognizing that based on performance. But as I said, I have 4 of those little flip things that you just, a little cam sort of thing, and they're in a box here somewhere, and they're designed to mount here, and they'll actually reach underneath the lip here. So I'll probably put those on at some point, because eventually, this is nothing more than just weather stripping. And eventually, that stuff is going to wear out. Doesn't matter, it's just foam weather stripping from the eye. Yes, Rich?
We dispose of that chips, like from a homeowner, you know, if you're doing a lot of work and you create a large amount of chips, do you typically just put it out for normal trash, or do you have another disposable?
Well, in my shop, we're in a commercial area, we have a dump. But in my home shop, and I'll get to that, I don't have a dust collection system. I have a vacuum system. It's called the Dust Cobra, and it's a 2.5-inch diameter duct, and it operates at vacuum pressures. And but at home, I don't have a table saw, I don't have a planer. I have a bandsaw, I have a drill press, I have a sander, and I have a garage that I clean up, you know, hand planing, shavings, and stuff like that, and it works like a champ because it's operating at that pressure level. So I don't have those large volume disposal
Because
things.
if I generate 3 trash bags full, I only put one out a week, you know, I'll just,
Sure.
because I don't want to inundate them with like 3 big black garbage cans.
Do you live in the country or in the northern area?
Urban. Don't have a garden.
Shrubs. And for whatever it's worth, if anybody's considering doing that, be aware that some woods are terrible. Like, people know people on farms, and they want to give it to them for the horses. Walnut is a no-no for lots of animals, so you gotta be careful with some things like that. I'm sorry, what's that?
It's a no-no for the grass, because it kills everything around it, that's why there's nothing
Sucks
right
all
around
the
walls.
nitrogen.
Ah, exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
Did you guys hear that? It's a no-no for the grass, your grass in your yard. Okay.
Unless you rot it first, like
Quick
compost.
on.
Does it,
So you talked about the canisters
Yes.
and cleaning them, and the systems don't have a canister for filtration, they have a bag. And I know from personal experience, an industrial laundromat will clean those to be able to make them back, because to sit there with an air line, you're just pushing the dust. But if you take that bag off, commercial laundromats will actually wash them, and they'll come back where they're back to having those fine micron available.
Are you allowed back in that laundromat if you go there once?
Well, so my system in my school, I have 8 airbags that allow the air to return back in. And yearly, we take them off, and we have an industrial laundry in the custodian department that washes uniforms and that kind of stuff. And they have yet to.
Dean, what I'm seeing in the general marketplace is there are fewer systems, and most are going to this sort of thing. Sometimes the perception is, oh, that's a HEPA grade filter, and it's not. It's maybe down to 2 microns or something like that. But you can get these in HEPA grade, which really, I mean, keeps everything or nearly everything inside. In the back?
Yeah, just from personal experience, your wife's washing.
Personal experience, filter bags are very, very, very flat.
Filter bags.
The long ones,
You
you
said-
dump it on the fire.
You said you have personal experience? So yours caught on fire?
Just like that.
A couple together a system like this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the Cyclone, other than to say they work fabulously.
Have you found a big difference between cyclones, like I've got the Rockwell chip separator versus an Oneida?
Yeah.
Is there a difference in
Almost,
performance?
I don't have experience, but in everything I read online, it pays to spend the extra money for the United.
I'm
Now,
wondering about the fanboys versus the reality.
yeah, well, I guess you could do a side-by-side test.
Yeah.
I have seen some guys who are doing really wonderful videos comparing these various things where they're scrupulous about cleaning and weighing the board before and after, weighing the dust generated, how much the loss, yada, 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 with pretty good results. What I will say is this. This is based upon what Oneida has said to me, so I can't absolutely tell you, that it's a fact, because they are in the business of selling, but they sell both of these products. They sell cyclones, vertical cyclones like this. They also sell a more of a horizontal based cyclone that fits on the top of a 5-gallon or maybe a garbage can. I don't know what size. And they're precisely to get rid of this tower that you have to create. And they're kind of indifferent as to which one they'll sell. So I always ask for the technical department, and I thought, I'm trying to decide, what do I want to do? And without hesitation, this is much more efficient at separation than the horizontal one. The horizontal one's a little more convenient if you don't have the height that's available to you. I'll come back to modifying a vacuum here in just a second. Just a couple more things about a system like this. A few things to kind of watch out for. Most collectors, most manufacturers, they will give you the rating of the dust collector, generally in free air with nothing attached to it. And if they're really cheating, they don't even have the filter on the downstream end of it attached to it. They're just telling you what the fan will suck through the opening. The opening being right here on the bottom that you see the tape on it. That's an 1100 CFM collector. I measured the flow at the opening and it was 1093 CFM. Wow. I didn't have anything connected to it. And I have read plenty of other people who have said it is accurate, but it is not a useful number, because as soon as you put a cyclone on it, that's worth about 10 to 15 feet of ductwork in terms of the amount of resistance that it will create. As soon as you put a filter on this end of it, which creates back pressure, that takes more capacity away. So in general, I would say if you're contemplating the purchase, buy as big as you can afford, because you're probably going to need some of that extra suction if you start to get far away from things. I think 1.5 horsepower is a sweet spot because it doesn't blow circuit breakers very easily in most people's homes. 2 horsepower, 3 horsepower, at 3 horsepower you're going to 220 volt. I have this wired for 220 volt just because it was easier for us to do that. And but I would buy 2 or more horsepower even for a small shop like that. That was going to be the escape valve here. Again, we knew we were on the hairy edge. If it didn't work, we'd have to pop for a more powerful collector. The power of a collector is all about 2 things: the size of the motor and the size of the impeller. This is 1.5 horsepower. It's got an 11-inch impeller. That's not a very big impeller. 2 horsepower and 3 horsepower, they run with the 14-inch impeller. That moves a lot more air, and that is probably where we'll need to go here when this one eventually goes. I have read that some people suggest turning that motor like that is putting a load on the bearings that the motor was never designed for. I see Frank shaking his head no. I get mixed readings on that with people say, I don't know what you're talking about. I've had mine like this for 5 years. I've never had a problem. Other motor people say, yeah, no, they're great. Others say, no, it's not designed that way. I don't know what the truth is. I haven't heard any bearing noise. I just don't know. But I see lots of people doing this to create this column and get it out of the way. And by get it out of the way, sometimes that's way in the corner of the garage. And then people will build a little enclosure around it so that they don't have to listen to this. That's not terrible, but it's not something you want to listen to all along. All right, I picked up the remote. That's the other heart of a system like this. And I probably should have said this first, but I'm saying it now. So when you design a system like this, there are a couple of different approaches. You can try to design, especially if you've got a big collector with a lot of capacity, you can try to design a system that will operate efficiently and with multiple gates open at the same time. There's a lot of math involved, there's a lot of balancing involved, there's a lot of research involved to make that happen and happen well. Having a remote control or several remote controls, Hannah would already have 3 or 4 of them, but Penn State, they're out of stock on these, or PSI, I think it is, PSI Woodworking. They're out of stock, and Lynn, they'll be back in stock. So the way I design the system is you put one of these everywhere you have a blast gate. And then, so effectively, she walks around with this, but I would probably have one right there at the table saw, I'd have one over there, I'd have one on this column here, and I'd have one over there. So there's never an excuse for you turn off the dust collector and you shut the gate. They're sitting there right at the same time. Raphael?
How about the ones that power on when you turn on your machine?
Those are great, but they're $200 a pop. I mean, so for my money, maybe they're
in your, I guess, the supply of your shop, you could put that sensor in the supply. So it wouldn't matter what machine you turn on, it would send a signal to power on the machine.
You have to have the corresponding
Each
one.
machine has to have
Yeah,
a
but you don't,
device that's compatible with it.
Sending.
well, but you just need to know that you're using a machine.
no, yeah, but there's also a servo that is opening and closing the blast gate in those systems.
Oh, okay.
So now let's go down that rabbit hole. There are all kinds of people online who have developed various, and I see.
How about Clapper?
Well, yes, and I see right here shaking his head. Yes, there are very, very simple. There are very simple systems where you do this, and it opens a circuit, and the collector goes on, and you use relays and things like that. So if you want to play with stuff like that, you can certainly design a system where you don't need that. This is $22. The whole system, the first one you buy where you get one of these and you get the other end, I think for a single horsepower like this is about $100, something like that. And this is not the only game in town. There's a lot of these out there.
And that works with your
was
220.
just misplacing it, misplacing it.
Yeah.
Where is it?
Well, and so again, my lazy attitude. No, I'm going to make a little joke here because I'm sorry, Elmer, because I know that Craig, my partner, will not mind my making a joke at his expense. So this is what I use in our big system in our shop. The steps between machines are appreciable. As I told you, I've got a big collector there. I did not design the system to have multiple gates open at one time, but I did recognize that my partner could be a little forgetful. So I have come into the shop the worst possible, and I think I gave him a little award for it that day. I found 5 blast gates open in the shop simultaneously. And it still was working, but it was working at a much smaller degree. So this sort of mechanism works very well, and I like, again, you can have it on your belt if you want, but I want it right next to the switch. There's no excuse that I don't get that and shut that at the same time. And most of the time, all the gates are shut on the shop because the thing isn't running, and you walk to the saw, you punch that, and you turn it on.
A little bit of trivia here.
Yes.
When I got that same, is that the Lone Ranger 2?
It is.
Yeah, so when I got that.
This is the 3, I'm sorry.
Oh,
3.
okay. When I got that, got it all installed, I was curious to see how far that range is. So my dust collector's in the garage. I started walking out the garage. It was still working. I walked to the back of my backyard, still working. I live on a golf course. I went 167 more yards, and it was still working. So it works at least to about 197 yards
There you
with a
go.
90-degree bend. So just in case your shop's that big.
Yeah. Yes,
Do
Bill?
they always have to be compatible with the unit?
You pair them.
Yeah, so where is that box?
You can
The-
pair them?
Oh, it's behind the filter.
And this system is designed for 220, and basically it's just that the contacts are bigger for potentially a greater amperage draw.
Because I
220
have-
at this
I have-
small size is not a lot of amperage draw.
Works, but I'd like to have more, and I don't wanna buy a new,
Well,
switch.
If you buy this brand, the pairing instruction
And you
side,
can pair it with
and you
anything.
can pair it with any of them.
Okay.
I've never had one that I couldn't pair. You must have missed it. Our friends at CMU gave us, the club, 6 of these things, and I've given them all away already. Part of the problem was a lot of them were rated for 220, and a lot of you guys aren't using 220. But John Holmes, the shop manager, told me, every now and then they'd have a little bit of a problem and they'd have to repair it because just, somewhere out in the ether, something bad happened. I've never had a problem losing pairing, never.
Okay.
That device is Bluetooth.
No, well,
No.
no, that's not Bluetooth.
If you wait, you could just
Yeah.
have an app. This is right an app. With your cell phone, just
What is it,
to
what
turn
is
it
it then?
on.
Is it infrared?
Sorry?
Is it infrared, does it need line of sight?
No, it doesn't need line of sight.
I think the other thing is for the
Go down the hallway with it.
vacuum sander combination, Raphael's point, think of the extension cords that have the control.
Yes,
That's $20.
Yes.
And it works really well.
Yes.
So that's the option for that.
What was that you're talking about?
So what Raphael was saying, there's if you're doing the vacuum extractor plus a sander thing, or something that's more high velocity, the extension cord you can buy from Amazon for $20 that has one control outlet, and then so when that turns on and that sucks, it turns on the vacuum. So it's not for this setup, but for your small setup, that works really well, and it's $20.
okay. So a couple more, yes, Raphael?
My wife uses a power strip. Right? You may be familiar with it. One of those outlets is a control outlet.
That's
So if you power something on that outlet, then it powers on the rest of the row.
Right.
And you can have your speaker, your monitor, your printer attached to that line. So when you turn on your laptop or computer, then it shuts down everything so you save power. So it's the same concept with this. If you have your lathe, you turn it on and then it creates a surge. That surge can be detected by the device.
But you're missing a critical point here. It's not about turning the collector on, it's about opening the blast gate. That's the mechanical action.
I may not know this, because don't use the systems, but when you get there, don't you open it up?
Yes, okay,
That's
so,
all you need to do, or you have to do something else besides that. If I'm gonna use that machine, I open the,
okay, so you've turned your machine on, you turn the saw on, and you reach over and you open the blast gate. Sure, and then you turn the saw off, the collector goes off, and as long as you remember to shut the blast gate, yeah, absolutely, now I understand what you're saying, sure.
And just to go way into the weeds, if you're hardwired, Leviton makes, it runs off the neutral wire. You can put a switch pretty much anywhere in your house that will turn on a light that's not on the same circuit. So it's like, if you're
That's
wired for that.
I think my head just exploded.
Yeah. Some of it's Wi-Fi.
I've got
Some of it runs off your phone
deep into
now.
home automation, and I ended up with a $15 Amazon plug-in little button remote because I don't want to take my phone out, scroll the app, turn it on, turn it off. But
But you can hardwire a switch in.
you can,
Even
that
though
switch
it's
is,
not on the circuit that's running the.
You know what I'm hearing
depending
here?
upon your home
I mean,
automation,
you
it
can go
may
into the
not be
weeds
as
way far.
responsive as you would like.
Yeah.
Well, I think what I'm hearing here between you three and maybe a couple of others is maybe another program on electrics and electronics and control issues in the shop. My point is simply this. The heart of the systems that I design is, as long as the collection will work at the farthest point away, and as long as I acknowledge I'm only going to have one blast gate open at a time, I don't care how spidery this whole thing looks, it's going to work for me because of the principle earlier on. I think Rich asked, or somebody, if you've got a branch shut off, it does not add resistance to the system. The system goes from the collector to wherever the gate is open. Yes, Rich?
Is there a way with one controller that you have in hand to be able to plug two devices, like a table saw and a joiner, into one of those controllers? Or do you have to have two controllers?
The controller is only used for the dust collector.
Oh, okay.
Only for the, in fact, they are, and if you think about this, it makes kind of perfect sense. They are emphatic that this controller is only to be used for dust collectors. You would never want to plug in a jointer, let's say, to it. One, the startup amperage may be too much for it, but two, you wouldn't want a machine that could potentially harm somebody coming on from a remote location, inadvertently or on purpose. And I'm sure that's their lawyers talking, but that's what they say for that. Yeah. So instead, you've got to go the route that Raphael's talking about. You turn your jointer on, and this thing has a sensor on it that senses the amperage draw there and turns this on. And there are lots of those systems that are out there as well. All right. I think before I get into demonstrating a couple things, let me go into a slightly different category here, and then I'm going to move around the room a little bit. Okay, so for those situations where you can't do the fine dust collection enough to satisfy your needs,
No pun intended.
vacuums are a good way to go. And actually, I should leave this on the floor because it's all about the height of it. So this is a probably 40-year-old fine vacuum, and I guess today everybody calls them dust extractors. And I was constantly cleaning the filter inside, constantly. So I wanted to put a cyclone separator on it. This is, what do they call this guy?
Dust it.
This is the dust deputy. I don't know what that one's called. Anyway, it doesn't matter. This does a fabulous job. Again, go online. You'll see all kinds of people. Many of them take the dust deputy, they have it on top of a 5-gallon pail. It usually lives right here next to it, and so it's a bigger footprint in the shop. I didn't want that bigger footprint. This actually is at home. I use it in the garage sometimes. I haul it around the house if I'm doing drywall work and sanding or whatever. And so that's why I wanted to go vertical with it. You'll notice that is a 5-gallon pail that I just cut off at 3 inches or 4 inches and siliconed it down. But this sucker separates all the fine dust. So if I have to clean my filter, I still do, but it's a far less frequent event. And this will turn most shop vacs, something like this, into a much more useful machine. Hannah uses that all the time, and of course, one, the filter is not a HEPA grade filter. There is a HEPA grade filter in here, and two, it gets plugged all the time, so she's only using that for gross cleanup. There are people out there, in this case, Oneida. Jason from down the hall brought this to me when he knew I was going to be doing this. That is the collection box, and guess what? That's designed to sit up on top of Festool dust extractors. So for those of you that have a Festool dust extractor and want cyclone separation, again, it creates this taller tower, but at least it's not a big footprint on the floor. The point I'm trying to make is introducing a cyclone separator is something that is well worth it. it's well worth the effort to figure out how to make it work in your shop. This height, for whatever it's worth, in my shop, that height right there, I have a cabinet screwed to the wall that holds screws and other stuff that's about that high. So the height of that cut was designed so this thing could slip underneath it, because everything's got to have a place, especially when you're trying to do something in a garage
How
shop.
does that portable unit versus a regular shop vac, if it had a HEPA filter in it, it had an outside exhaust, right? I don't mean exhaust, but how does that differ?
Can't answer that.
Okay.
Price.
They both suck.
Is one more effective?
Maybe this one will last longer. I mean, today a fine extractor, how much is a Festool extractor? $1,000? Is that about it? And I think
There's a
the
lot
fine-
of, you know, Bosch one for, you know, 300 or 400.
And that may be the sweet spot, right there.
Right.
These, my understanding is most people consider these disposable. You beat the shit out of it, excuse me, for a couple of years, and then you throw it away, and you know, and you get it, you go on to the next one. And there's nothing wrong with it. That may be the best long-term solution. Dust extractors tend to be, I think, a lot quieter than those things.
I guess I'm really trying to figure out, like, what benefit I would have, where would I get a benefit if I upgraded from my shop vac and my chip separator to something else? And I realize you can't answer that,
And that's 40-year-old. The new ones are probably, I don't know how many decibels less than that. So that's easier than these things kind of really scream. Yeah. But beyond that, I think it's personal experience. I had that because this one has, believe it or not, pneumatic sensing. So we used to use this in the shop with all of our pneumatic palm sanders. It was the only thing I could find that would trigger on when it sensed an air load as opposed to an electrical load. So that's why I have that, and I bought that used, and it was that long ago.
Hey, Bill?
Yes,
So the chips go into the bucket,
the bucket. So therefore,
and how do you empty that?
well,
You need one of your-
There's a tab there.
Here's a tab. Anyway, you just take the top off. And in fact, it needs to be
And
empty.
then you scoop it out.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Okay, so, big advocate of cyclone separation. I don't think you will ever regret it, and I think it's well worth it. All right, so last thing, before we turn a couple of machines on. So what has Oneida invented? This what do I call it? Supercell? Supercell. So they have this product out there. You can all go to the internet and look at it. It's effectively a cyclone with a motor on top of it and a dust pail below it. And I should be more specific, with motors on top of it. So instead of using an impeller and a 1.5 or 2 horsepower motor, they have either 3 or in a product they call their turbo version, 4, for lack of a better term, vacuum motors inside, just like the kind of motor that's in here. The difference between an impeller is an impeller turns at nominally probably 3,450 RPM. That's what most of these electric motors are. Those vacuum motors turn at about 45,000 RPM. So they cannot move the quantities of air, the CFMs, that a collector can, but they can create tremendous static pressure. So this supercell unit that Oneida sells will work on anything from 1-inch duct to 5-inch duct. And it's designed for the shop that will put it on the wall, and apparently it has enough suction that it'll perform through up to 100 feet of flexible hose like this in a 4-inch diameter. So it's designed for people who will unplug it from this machine and go plug it into this machine. I specifically asked them, if I want to hook it up to a hard ducted system to be able to use it that way, they said absolutely no problem, and in fact, you'll get better performance because you have even less, you have much less resistance in a hard ducted system than you have in this. So for $2,800, $3,000, you can have a system that works as a dust collector as well as a vacuum system, as long as your collection needs are not going to require more than what you could expect to pull through a 4-inch duct. For most home woodworkers, that's probably perfectly adequate. One machine at a time. Not a bad solution. And they'd probably love to sell you one.
Probably noisy.
I do not know. They probably make claims that it's not that noisy, but
It's not bad.
you've heard it?
I got it.
And it's kind of, it's more whiny like this
Yeah.
than like that, right?
They
Are you
claim,
happy?
they claim 80
I've only
decibels.
used it a little bit, we talked about this, we're setting on it now, but, yeah, it's, it works great.
Okay.
What's it called again?
Supercell.
Supercell.
You can, most of them they sell are the mounted ones, I got one that's on a mobile base, cause I wasn't sure how I was gonna set up the shop,
Yeah.
but,
How big are those? Is it like the size of this workbench?
oh, no.
Just
It's,
big in diameter.
it's about the size of that rigid, only it's like a tower, it's about this tall.
Oh, I'm thinking of something else. What
Yeah.
is this? I saw this big thing that, it's about the size of a workbench.
That's the Harvey system.
Yeah.
Oh,
You used to
I
get-
was thinking
yeah,
this
the
was.
turbine thing, it looks,
Yeah.
got a rounded top to it,
Yeah.
yeah, that's the Harvey.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And I don't know if any of you heard, Elmer's wondering what's the big horizontal unit. I'm not quite sure what Harvey is chasing with that. The biggest criticism I've heard of it is that they're not using gravity to assist in separation because everything is going on horizontally. So it's, my words, I think it's a bit of a Rube Goldberg sort of invention. Not quite sure what the intended market is for it, but
It's a big footprint too.
it's a big footprint.
Because it's two collection activities.
Yeah, the
There's a
collection is
coarse
built
one and
into
a
it.
fine one,
Yeah.
and each have their own little
Yeah,
turbine thing.
yeah.
Although it doesn't spin, it just has vanes.
Okay, so let's just do a couple quick collection things here. And I took some videos, which I will just run on my iPad after the meeting because it's not really practical to try to do it now, and we don't have our TV to be able to project. But let me define for you what the hairy edge is. So you see that pile of chips on the floor over there? So I put in a floor sweep here and one at the other end. And if Hannah's generating a lot of chips, she'll sweep them up. But she loves using this. I've got one in my shop. I love using it, again, inherently lazy. And it's just a quick way to pick stuff up. So I measured this yesterday. At this point, which should be the same as this point, I measured 3,500 feet per minute airflow. That is enough airspeed to lift something vertically. Barely enough, but it is enough. This is about 5.1 square inches of space, so all of that equates to 390 CFM. Now that's less CFM than 5-inch duct would normally have. 5-inch should be able to carry closer to 500. So clearly even though that is an 1100 CFM collector, we've lost a lot of stuff between there and here. What I want you to listen to is when I sweep these in there, you're going to hear them rattling. And you're going to hear them rattling for a lot longer than you would hear them rattling if it was a properly sized system. But it still works. They don't settle out. Now you notice you didn't hear anything, so I hear a couple little errant chips, but stuff really wasn't in there. And I do know from experience with her that if you just throw everything in there, there's not enough suction. It will plug down here. But if I do it at a reasonable pace, you hear it, 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 you hear it. That's what I mean by hairy edge. So, if that filter gets dirty, this doesn't work as well. So we're right at the limit, so what one can expect. But this really wasn't designed for this many chips over here, because at this end of the shop, she's largely collecting dust from sanding at the lathe, dust from the disc sander, and effectively dust from the bandsaw. And conveying lighter particles like dust is a very easy thing to do. What is harder to do with light particles is actually capturing them, but it is possible, and I'm going to demonstrate that here in just a second. Now let's talk about capture just for a second. So this is a 2.5 inch by 12 inch piece of duct. That's 30 square inches, and that is, let me think about that. This is actually oversized to what the duct will actually happen, but Hannah kind of forced my hand on that because she said, nah, a lot of my stuff is about that long. I want to be able to capture. What you're going to find here, well, let's just do it. This is what I want you to watch for. If I drop dust real close, it'll go right in. If I drop dust farther and farther away, it will not get sucked in, because the ability for suction to work as you move farther and farther away from the confined duct port gets more and more difficult. And out here, it's effectively impossible. It just doesn't work. That's what Penz's point is with respect to superfine dust and capturing it. It takes huge amounts of suction to create a bubble of negative pressure that will allow that fine dust to go in there. Some of that can be done by increasing the size of the hood, or being sure that the tool is expelling its dust directly into that, and I'll give you another area where that is. So let's put this on.
Bill, you have the other stuff.
Thank you. All right, so here we are close to it. And then obviously you see a little bit there. And maybe, but there gravity is stronger than the ability to, and again, we are on our hairy edge here, but the thing, and I got a video of this, the thing that to remember is when this guy is in place here, this is a little homemade rig I put together. When that guy is right there and this lathe is turning like this and she is sanding, it is ejecting that sawdust. She typically sands right on the top, so it's ejecting it straight forward, and it almost goes into the duct on its own, but often her hands are in the way and whatever, and when this guy is in close, it does a very good job of capturing that dust. What we both knew going in was we would probably have to create a different hood here. This is not really a hood. I mean, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the term is we want to create an air horn where the sides are sloped in to create a less turbulent way for the air to flow into the duct. We talked about it a little bit yesterday, and she was adamant that she didn't want anything higher than this because she's often got her hands up over the top. This guy comes in real close for smaller work. So with the mechanical advantage of throwing the dust at this unit, it works much better for collecting that sort of thing. This unit is not a problem. Master disc sander. Master has a little dust collector inside. It's driven by the same motor that drives the disc. All we did was hook a hose up to the bottom of that. It collects pretty much everything that you can throw at it. Bandsaws, I haven't worked on this yet. Somebody asked earlier about collecting from bandsaws. Bandsaws are difficult. There's a lot of information online. The stuff that made the most sense to me is, excuse me one second, let me just get in here because I'm going to kind of point. The stuff that made the most sense to me is that the problem under here, this little Delta thing, this little port is the most ridiculous toy that anybody has ever come up with, and it's effectively useless. The problem is underneath the bandsaw table, one, the casting is created with ribs in it for strength, but that creates a lot of hard to seal against voids on the underside. So most people will take little blocks of wood, cut them so that they fill the void, grab some caulk, stick them in place. Caulk is reversible. Some glues are not easily reversible. You want to always check that you can be able to rotate the table through everything. But now they have a flat surface, and then by far the simplest I've seen is a guy who just took a piece of PVC, mounted it in here, cutting halfway through it with the blade, having left this side open and sucking from this side. So effectively the blade was passing right through this suction, this current of air that was being sucked back to the collector.
So it's like a T, PVC with a T on it?
No T,
no?
it's just a straight piece here. This side is
Oh,
open.
I see, okay. The
and-
PVC's going in horizontally.
And the hose is
Oh,
coming in
okay, I
from
thought
this
you
side.
meant a tube around the,
It did a great job of it. And I'll show you the video of my big saw. That's effectively what I did, except I built a box that fits in here. But I had the opening in this side of the box equaling essentially equaling the size of the hose going in, so I would draw air across it. It is a reasonable approach to collecting from a bandsaw. The downside, and the reason why at least my opinion, the reason why manufacturers don't do it is because you can't tilt the table with it in place. So the simple solution is everything is held in with rare earth magnets. When you want to use it, you pop it in, it sits there, and let's face it, our bandsaws, for most of us, probably sit at 90 degrees for 98% of their life. And when you want to tilt it, you take it away, you tilt the table, and you don't worry about the collecting the dust in those operations when you're on an angle like that. So that'll be the next step here. I'm working on my own bandsaw at home, which is an old 18-inch Sears Craftsman built by Atlas, that similar sorts of things. But every bandsaw is unique. I've seen lots of elaborate things with people with shrouds here and collection ports down here. They don't seem to work as well because the farther you get away from the point of generation, which is right here, directly under the table, the farther you get away from there, the bigger the challenge in actually capturing that dust. The guy who owned this bandsaw before claims that this worked just fine. I call bullshit on that, but that's what he claims, that worked just fine. I've read plenty of people who say, yeah, it helps, but it doesn't do anything if you don't actually collect right up there. And anything else before I get up? Because I only get up once. Okay, so that's what's going on there. What else? Chop saw. Chop saws are really, really, really difficult. That's why we haven't done much to it yet. What we have done is, in the back of the chop saw, there is a big gulp duct with a 4-inch opening at the bottom of it and slanted sides. It's probably best to get in there and so you can brush dust into it. That's where this hose goes. I purchased off of one of the sellers on Etsy. Let me
Same thing.
let me turn this saw here because you'll be able to see it a little easier. So I purchased this 3D printed collection port. Bosch's original port didn't come down as far, wasn't nearly as elaborate, and didn't have this size of tubing in it. This machine really should be collected with a vacuum and not a dust collector. I'm going to run it for you, but what we're going to find here is that even though we're only necking down to 2.5 inch here, you can barely feel the suction, but it does work. And the other thing we need to do, I think, is somehow segregate this from this, because even though you can only pull so much through a port of this side, as I said earlier, if this one is open at the same time as this one, we are degrading our performance just a little bit. Last thing is, realistically at a chop saw, and our next step is get some cardboard, cut it, build a shroud around it, because you can see it all over the wall. And Hannah just recently cleaned this. Even with this running, there's enough blow-by that it gets everywhere. So keep it inside a shroud, turn on the collector, brush it into that thing, have some banking inside the shroud, and try to collect it like that. So did I close those valves on that end, all those glass gates?
The company on Esky makes those for almost any brand of chop.
Oh, yeah,
It's Shop Nation.
And it, I think that's it, yeah.
Shop Nation,
And
yeah.
I don't know, it was like $45.
Yeah, it wasn't expensive.
Really wonderfully engineered, and it works really well.
What's the name of that company?
Shop Nation.
Nation.
Shop Nation. They also sell on Amazon.
Nation.
Yeah.
Where's mine? So this is why I don't like one remote. I left it somewhere.
A Long Ranger. I thought it was Lone Ranger, but it's Long Ranger.
You'll have to get kind of close to see this, but let's do it like this. If you watch right there, you'll see all the dust. And then without the collector on, it's still going to go in there because it's there, but you'll see more blowout. It's a little hard to see but it's coming out the sides, and it really starts to get crazy if you have wide boards that you're cutting. Like she uses this to break down all of her lumber. So if she's out here and is cutting, then it's going everywhere. One thing I will say, just has nothing to do with dust collection, but if you end up with one of these shrouds purchased, a couple of tips. One, and you can see it, this little skirt here is already being torn up a little bit. A really important technique is, and chop saws are designed this way, they're not really designed to plunge and cut through for wide stuff.
Oops, it fell off.
That's a climb cut.
It fell off.
Oh, and it's held on by magnets so that you can get rid of it if you need to for a special cut. Let me just put it back in place. Let me see. There it is. So you're not supposed to cut from back to front. Oh, and it fell off because it got caught here. The proper way to cut is you come all the way out, you plunge, and then you go through the cut like that. And by doing that, if you plunge, that thing rides over the top of the wood, as opposed to if you pull through, it's going to get caught on the backside of the wood and get torn off. So it's designed, it's designed to get as low as possible to capture as much, but you have to use the saw right. The other downside to these things is, while 3D printing is a very powerful technique, it is not the strongest material in the world. So there are plenty of people on this guy's website and others who complain that, I spent $50 and it was great for a month until I launched a piece of wood at it and it shattered it. And to this guy's credit, I think he's actually given some of these people a replacement with the warning, you've got to really know how to use it correctly. But one of the best tips that I read in all of that is, if you're cutting small pieces that will likely get launched, this should be the technique. You cut it, you shut the saw off, and only when it stops spinning do you come up, and that little piece that, if the saw was still spinning, would very possibly, and I've launched lots of pieces on my chop saw, and it takes a little to change your habits, but it's a really good habit to get into. You know, small stuff. If you're doing this, no problem. That piece is not going to go anywhere. It's generally, if it's in front of the right-hand fence. Some people argue, well, if you open the fences up, then you have more of a problem. If you close the fence, you can cut real small pieces and they won't go anywhere. But you can't close the fence too much with something like this, because you can see it needs to pass through the fence. So this is a work in progress. When we get a shroud built for it, I'll take a photo and bring it to a meeting at some point. I'm working on a shroud for my Makita right now with not a lot of success. It's still going everywhere. And I have it hooked up to a vacuum. So anyway, that's all I have, I think, prepared. Oh, wait, one more. I'm sorry. Over here at this saw. So let me grab a couple things here. And look at one of those big hoods over mine. Grab this, and a screwdriver. So let me show you what happens when you try to use a dust collector.
Just one comment.
Yes.
I want to congratulate you on the engineering you've done here. This is fabulous.
Thank you.
There's one thing I would question though. Why isn't there a cleanup on that long run there?
Cockiness on my part.
Cockiness?
Yes.
Okay, I accept that.
Because it's designed right.
No, actually, Ken, partly because I was already a few $100s over Hannah's budget on this, and I didn't want to add one more to it, although she would never say no, but I was just trying to be respectful of that. And two, plenty of companies sell saddle fittings, which is basically a fitting that has a half-round saddle on it that fits right over the duct. So at anywhere you want, you can cut a hole in the duct, put this saddle fitting on the top, which can contain a 45-degree Y on it. So I can add a cleanout anywhere that I would need to in the future if it proved to be necessary.
Yeah, I could just see you get a plug in there somewhere, and you know, my way of doing it would be a long stick, you know, with something on it, trying to push it out, but
Yeah.
you're confined even by the walls there.
So the way to do it, where I have that elbow right there, that turns to the
Yes.
wall, that should not have been an elbow.
It should be a Y.
That should be a Y right there, and then you
Okay.
just tap the end, and you're done.
Okay.
So,
All right.
and in hindsight, I mean, I have a very clear memory of this. I probably thought about it too late, was trying to get it done. It was another order away, plus another $20 of shipping, and I said, screw it, I'm just gonna put it up like this. So, a
Okay.
bunch of reasons, but you're absolutely right, it should contain that.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, so, here's the situation where we're going 5 inches. This is a 5-4-4 reducer, because SawStop is asking for 4 inches at the back of their saw. It could probably be bigger than that, but SawStop understands the market. That's what people have, so that's what they designed for. So this 4-inch goes to the bottom back of the saw. This guy here is for future expansion, for her to grab oscillating spindle sander and stuff like that. That's why you see a 4-inch glass gate there. And this one here is designed to come off of it with a piece of 2.5-inch flexible tube, which is sitting in the box over there, to hook onto the back of SawStop's overarm or blade guard. And I'm I'm not gonna hook this up, other than I'm gonna just kind of show you, just because you don't need to be sold on this, but that's how fast the riving knife comes out and the blade guard goes on. Now, the reason I'm showing you the blade guard, and you'll be able to see this best from over here, so it's all about capturing. I don't know what, somebody can do the quick math, well, what's the tip speed on a 10-inch blade?
It's 100 miles an hour.
100 miles an hour, okay. So that blade, when it's living up in here, is throwing all of its sawdust right against the underside of this curve, and there's a lip down here. And when I put suction here, even suction from here, even reduced suction, which this is my fitting. There's SawStop's fitting. That's a 1 1/4 inch fitting right there. There is enough suction from a dust collector through a small diameter like that, that it's just enough that with the momentum that sawdust is taking right there, it throws it right against this curve, right around the corner, and it pulls it and does a fabulous, surprisingly fabulous job of collecting the sawdust that comes off the top of the saw blade. I will tell you, I don't use this very often in my shop. It's pretty well designed. I probably should use it more. I'm going to try, that's a promise, I'm going to try to start using it more. But I tend to do a lot of narrow work, and I just find it, like any guard, I just find it in my way to be able to get push sticks or anything else through there if I'm doing small pieces like table legs or whatever. That said, I've just shown you, it comes off fast, so there's no real excuse for it. But it's more to the point that it catches the dust really well. If I'm breaking down big sheets of MDF, plywood, ripping boards, especially if I'm cleaning up the edge like this is a great thing to have, because between that and what's going on down below, it really does a good job of capturing the dust that this machine generates.
Phil,
Yes, Rich?
I make my own zero clearance inserts, and it'll be very tight. It'll be the width of the curve for the blade. And then I'll have a finger hole to remove the insert.
Right?
If I have my fence so far over, covering that finger hole, my dust collector has a hard time pulling that dust through that curve.
Is this on a SawStop?
No.
Okay.
If I move the fence away to uncover that hole, it sucks it on, no problem.
Huh.
I don't understand, the principles of having that hole open, creating a vacuum down there, but if it closes it off, it won't pull down the dust.
I don't understand that either, because there's lots of leakage around the saw cabinet on most.
Oh,
sides.
I have it silicone everywhere.
Well, then maybe, all right.
It's tight,
Okay.
but, like I said, I don't understand when that finger hole is covered by the fence.
Well, Rich, maybe what you want to do is, zero clearance, all you care about is this cut right here. Maybe you want to drill some little holes on either side of it. I see bandsaw throat inserts that have holes in precisely for that reason.
I think I gotta put a finger hole on the other side.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so, what I was gonna say, the only thing I don't like about SawStop system here, but I just, once again, wanna just change this out. That fast, right? We're back to a riving knife, so, Bill, pay attention to what you're saying, do as you say, not as you do. We're back to normal. SawStop generates the suction here in their system by putting a 90-degree T right down there at the bottom in the back where they're sucking the 4-inch in. So they violate all the rules. They're trying to suck air through a small like that. They're taking it off at 90 degrees instead of at a 45 degree. And I think it's a really well-engineered saw, but I think that there are some little stupid things like that people will try it, and all the reviews I've read say, this thing doesn't work at all. It just doesn't work. So that's kind of why I came outside to try to create a greater level of suction. I have tested it, same saw in my shop, same operation, same here, and it works really, really well. And that's with dust collection, not a vacuum. Okay, so, I'm going to give one of you a tremendous business opportunity. What you are going to discover, and I'm sure all of you have actually already discovered this, one of the biggest challenges, not so much in the duct work, but in hooking all the machines up, and especially smaller hand tools, there is absolutely no standardization in all of these things, right? Metric, domestic, different sizes. You can't get the damn retailers to tell you, is that the OD or the ID that you're talking about? Is it tapered? Is it straight? And I've actually had a long conversation with Vince at Rockler to say, why can't you guys do a better job of this? And he gave me some song and dance and marketing.
They don't want to.
Because they don't want to.
It's like phone chargers.
Yes.
Until the EU made Apple conform.
Yes.
They have their own special charger because they can sell it.
Yep. So the business opportunity is, it's not hard to start a website. It's not hard to develop, I don't think it's hard to develop relationships with a lot of these manufacturers. Sell every single kind of adapter that you can get your hands on with a really high quality drawing of every single one. ID, OD, length, taper, bip. And I think, I have looked and looked. There are plenty of people that sell, but they don't, they don't have that one. I know that one's available, and I can get that from Woodcraft or whatever. One-stop shopping would make things a lot easier.
You know, Bill, I use rubber plumbing fittings.
I have too.
And just eliminate the problem.
I agree.
This is so much easier. They're like $5, and
They have a name. What are they called, those coupling?
Oh, fern coats.
Fern coats. Every plumber in the world's got a truck full of fern coats.
I made another discovery recently. I bought an old Delta 12-inch disc sander, and I wanted to hook it up to my 2.5-inch vacuum system in my garage. The exhaust on the disc sander is an oval shape that's about like that. So I started to make, actually I made a little wood housing for it, and then I thought, you still got to get from here to round. So I was just kind of online, and as it turns out, all the, I don't know what they call them, the guys who do all the, I think they call them tuners, the guys who take the little 4-cylinder cars and they turbocharge them and they this and they that. Well, in the tuners world, for superchargers and turbochargers and stuff like that, they need all kinds of silicone rubber boots that will go from here to here, and I found one that will go from this size, which you can, I figured out what the circumference of my oval was and turned it into a round, and something incredible, like $18 later, including postage, this seemingly aerospace quality silicone boot came that I slipped down the oval end, I slipped down the other end, and it was like, oh my God, this thing is great. So if you're looking for some odd shaped stuff, the tuners.
PVC and a heat gun will get you started. PVC pipe and a heat gun, heat it up.
Oh yeah, done that
cool.
too. You're absolutely right. It works like a champ. And you can make it get
Just have
bigger,
$1 million
or you can
boots
make it
while
get
it's
smaller.
rubber.
No. Yeah, but not everybody will do that. That's the thing. Anyway, so this is Rockler's system, and I actually kind of like it. I didn't bring them all, but they sell these guys. This is their version of a flexible hose. It stretches out to about 12 feet. It's a little heavy, like all these hoses. It's a little catchy on the edge. One of the first things I used to teach new employees is cord and hose management. is an integral part of doing good work. So you have it over your shoulder, your tool is here, and you're not dragging over the edge of this, because if you're running a router and this thing catches back here, you've just ruined something that you just spent 50 hours trying to make. So your cord, this stuff is always where you can manage it. That said, this is a pretty nice thing. The nice thing about it is it's a pretty good diameter, so you can get a little more air and dust moving through there. They've got these various fittings that screw on the end. They're left-hand threads, so that takes forever for me to get used to. And this end will fit on the Festool very nicely. So now I can generate some suction here. And again, I didn't have the right size, so duct tape solved that. Wrong duct tape. That'll be good enough for that. And so let's first of all start with, thank you.
Bill, for what it's worth, I found a hose clamp on the other end by the tool.
Here.
Really just makes it that much better, right? It just doesn't slip off.
I hate hose clamps. They always cut my hands. I hate them. Hate them with a passion. That's why I've left. This never comes off. I mean, it's really this whole system. The hose, three, four of these, blah blah blah. I mean, it's pricey. It's probably $45.
Yeah,
It's worth
the
it.
newer
It's
ones
worth
are
every
magnetic,
penny to
but
me.
the older ones like that, yeah.
Anyway,
Okay.
so again, something that was surprising to me is even without the sander running, it will vacuum up dust. Now, in a proper system, in a vacuum system, I can watch that dust going out from about that far away. But the Festool system is designed, I don't know what they're doing inside this thing, but they're throwing dust at the right place, and no, you gotta plug it in. I don't need to plug it in. No, I more time to do it, I'll do it. May I have that number? At the edge, I can see a little coming off, but not much. And if I turn this off, I get remarkably a pretty similar result, but some will come off. And if I stand there long enough, I'll create a pile there. Early in the morning when the sun's at a really low angle, you can see it coming off. But the point I'm trying to make is, in a pinch, this, even though it doesn't really work very well, is going to provide something better than just spewing it out in the room. And I know from personal experience, if I use this without dust collection on it, I cover the windshield if I've left my wife's car in the garage within 10 minutes. If I put the vacuum on, she doesn't know if I've been in the garage. So, not that she would care, but it works remarkably well. And if I put a meter on here, I've got one here. This is a $30 Amazon purchase. That's 500 feet per minute, but that is a 1-inch diameter. So let's do the math. So 0.5 times 0.5 times pi. So that's 0.78 square inches divided by 144. That's how many square feet it is, times 500 feet per minute. That's 2.7 CFM. A sneeze is more than 2.7 CFM. So that's really not enough air. And there's, of course, there's very little suction here. If we did the same with the vacuum, you would get remarkably different answers than that. But that's why we don't go in that direction with Sanders. In a pinch, yeah, but use a vacuum if you can. Okay, questions? We've kind of gone in a lot of different directions here, but oh, and I will say this. If anybody wants to do this on their own and they want a willing ear to listen or some advice or a problem or whatever, call me. I'm always available. Happy to lend a hand. So, anyway, thank you.
So to the guy from Urban Tree, and his gallery is open just here. He has some cool stuff, and he said we can look around his project if we want. And there's also a tour for Pottery Studios on the 5th and 2nd floor.
Oh, great. Thank you. All right, well done.
Yeah.